motion proposed approval by Dáil of the Horse and Greyhound Fund Regulations 2020. I'm calling on the Minister, Deputy Charlie McConalogue, to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Ciarla. That is an important part of government policies to ensure the horse and greyhound racing industries. I move the motion. Thanks, Ciarla. That's Ciarla. That's Concorda. An important part, deputies, of government policies to ensure that the horse and greyhound racing industries achieve their maximum potential, and in so doing contribute to a balanced economic and social development across a wide geographic swathe of the country. The horse and greyhound racing industries make a significant and valuable contribution to our economy. It is estimated that the thoroughbred industry has an annual economic impact of £1.9 billion, with direct and indirect employment of 29,000 people, while the greyhound sector provides an estimated 12,000 people with economic benefit. The thoroughbred industry in particular brings a high level of international blue-chip investment to Ireland. Government funding, in addition to supporting these key industries, also presents an excellent opportunity to yield a high return for its investment, leading to a flow of income right through the economy. Support for certain strategic industries is important for future economic growth and can provide widespread benefits to our society as well as for our economy. The Irish equine breeding and racing industry is extremely competitive at a global level. We're the third biggest producer of thoroughbred foals in the world, and estimates place Ireland only behind the United States as the biggest seller of bloodstock by a public auction globally. Successive governments have acknowledged the importance of these industries and have supported them through legislation and policy initiatives. The support provided by public funds through investment in these industries has enabled Ireland to develop a world-class reputation for excellence in horse racing, greyhound racing and breeding. The current COVID-19 pandemic poses particular challenges for Horse Racing Ireland, Rastiac Con Éireann and industries as a whole. The Government Plan on Resilience and Recovery living with COVID-19 does not provide at any of the levels for a return to full commercial operations. And this impacts significantly on the finances of HRI and RCE, both this year and up to the end of the time span of the plan in June 2021. It is essential, therefore, Las Concorda, in these circumstances that the additional COVID-related supports are made available to HRI and RCE, reflecting costs incurred and changes to the trading environment. These industries receive financial support through the state, from the state through the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund under Section 12 of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Act 2001. My department makes payments from the fund to HRI and RCE. In the period 2021 to date, a total of 2001 to date, a total of 1.36 billion has been paid from the fund to the horse and greyhound racing industries. In accordance with the provisions of the Act, the cumulative upper limit on the funds provided for under the relevant legislation has therefore been reached. Exchequer funding provided from the fund is crucial to the survival and continued development of the horse and greyhound racing industries, and in order to give effect to the previous provisions of Budget 2021, the upper limit must be increased by regulation. The estimates, therefore, for my department passed by both houses as part of Budget 2021 include an allocation of €96 million for Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund, which will be distributed in accordance with the Act, with 80% going to HRI and 20% to RCE. In order to allow my department to provide the monies allocated in Budget 2021, it is necessary to comply with the tactical requirement to increase the cumulative limit, and this is achieved by way of regulations Las Concorda submitted to the House today. The 2017 Deloitte and report into the economic impact of Irish breeding and racing, commissioned by HRI, indicates that the total direct and stimulated expenditure of Irish breeding and racing is €1.84 billion as of 2016. In addition, it is estimated that there are 15,200 jobs at the core of racing and breeding or in directly related industries. Horse racing generates a very significant return to the rural economy in Ireland and a positive international profile for the country as well. The 2019 annual report for HRI indicated a successful year and a focus on ownership that led to a further increase in the number of horses in training and more horses competing. In relation to the greyhound racing industry, Las Concorda, a 2017 Power report provided that indicated how the industries provide support and considerable employment both directly and indirectly. And it was estimated that in 2016 the industry supported 5,000 full-time jobs and part-time jobs in the economy, with some 7,300 greyhound owners. So overall, Chairperson or Laskin Corla, I think there's a very valid and strong rationale for funding both industries in the way that we do, and also for the increase this year, given the particular pressures of COVID has placed on both of them, to support them in their work. Thank you.
Dail, Deputy McCarthy, 5 minutes.
This issue was debated at length at the Agriculture and Marine Committee last week, and the debate was very comprehensive. And at that, I put on the record, and I'll do so again today, that Sinn Féin absolutely support vibrant horse racing and greyhound racing sectors in Ireland. We recognise the value they bring to many rural communities in particular, and the huge contribution they make to local economies that in many respects are bereft of other investment. That's not to say that we simply support the proposition that we sign blank cheques to any organisation. The Minister is proposing that we increase the funding to the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund to €96 million. Under any parameter, that is a substantial investment on the part of the state. When you consider in 2014 the level of funding to those organisations was €54 million, you can see the sizeable increase year on year. At last week's meeting, I said that while our support for the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund was absolute, we also had questions in relation to the accountability and transparency mechanisms that have been put in place. The Minister seemed to suggest that there was a contradiction in those terms. I don't think at all that it's contradictory for elected representatives to say that you can support a sector, but you also want to ensure that the money that's provided to that sector is fully accounted for. There's a number of questions that still haven't been resolved with regard to this funding. Why this amount of funding next year? Why this increase to this organisation when we consider so many other organisations across a whole variety of sectors are also struggling as a result of COVID-19 and would very much appreciate a similar proportionate increase in their funding? And why is it that this level of funding is required this year? Was the 2020 funding expent? Was it fully expent? Is the Minister satisfied that it was spent in the way that it would derive the best benefit to our economy and to our rural communities, as that they are the cited reasons for this funding? Is this going to be a new baseline funding stream for these organisations, or is it simply a COVID emergency increase that's being provided for? The Minister hasn't indicated whether he's satisfied that the way in which the money is spent derives that maximum benefit. I note that last year, for example, €67 million or thereabouts was allocated to Horse Racing Ireland. Horse Racing Ireland paid out €68 million in prize funds. Breeders in my county, trainers in my county, horse lovers in my county tell me that prize money does not trickle down. It disproportionately goes to those who are already successful in the industry. Has the Minister carried out an appraisal as to whether or not this is the best use of funds by Horse Racing Ireland? The Minister, and he was asked a number of times over the last week as to whether or not it is prudent to simply divide this funding 80-20 between the horse racing and greyhound sector. He essentially told the committee last week that this is just as it always was done. But I note in the Sunday Business Post that his own department confirmed that they had actually sought legal advice as to whether or not this should be the case. So rather than the government being in full support of the greyhound sector, you were actually looking for a way to actually reduce the level of funding, or at least reduce the increase in funding that would go to that sector. I think it's disappointed that the Minister didn't inform the committee of that fact last week, and I'd like to hear some elaboration as to what the Minister's intention is in that regard. If we're going to pay over or close to €100 million to one particular sector, at a time that even in terms of the sectors that come under the auspices of the Minister's own department, whether that be our beef farmers, whether it be our sheep farmers, whether it be our dairy farmers, other sectors that are struggling, then we have to be absolutely sure that that money is going to be well spent. There has to be absolute transparency, and there has to be full accountability, and there has to be a full appraisal that the money that's been invested is being invested in the right way to ensure that we have a proper regional balance in terms of the beneficiaries of that fund, and that we're actually supporting the principle of animal welfare, that we're ensuring that everything that we do, every taxpayer's money, cent of taxpayers' money, can be stood over in terms of the real concerns that many people have with regard to animal welfare, particularly in the greyhound sector. Gormai Gatlaskin Corla.
And we will be supporting this fund for both the racing and greyhound industries, although I think the concept of a greyhound industry is a slight misdemeanour in qualification as to what that is, because really it's more a hobby. But we do so with a lot of qualifications, Minister. And the first one, I'm going to speak to both horse racing and greyhound racing. The first one is I don't have confidence in the IGB. I haven't had confidence in the IGB for years. Myself and the Lasker Hirlock had them in front of the Public Accounts Committee. It was a circus, absolute circus. Not much has changed. Some of the people are still there. So one thing at the very outset here. Last week, we wouldn't have supported the Social Democrats' motion. However, we could not support the government's counter-motion because it was effectively written by the IGB, who we don't have confidence in. I implore on you, and I've never done this with yourself individually, please look at the board of the IGB for all of us, because it needs complete overhaul. And I know you've so much going on with COVID and Brexit and everything, but the IGB needs a more hands-on approach from the government. In relation to greyhound industry, or the greyhound people, many of whom are working class people, greyhounds are their horses effectively. They're some of the most decent, honourable people you'll ever meet. There are some bad eggs. They need to be weaned out. And I think the comments associated with a board member of the IGB in relation to our colleague here, Deputy Holly Cairns, are absolutely disgraceful. And that doesn't give any greyhound racing industry a good name. I presume the board and yourself are going to deal with that matter. She can speak for herself, but that, you can't be making comments like that, no matter what one's view is in relation to any sector. The issue of welfare is something that's very important. The idea that 10% of welfare is actually going to welfare is not happening. That'd be 1.5 million at least. That's not happening. Transparently show me how that is happening. And I want to say one thing to you, Minister. I actually don't compliment British authorities in relation to much, but actually a Greyhound Trust needs to be set up and separate from the IGB. Can have IGB board members on it to have crossover, but keep it separate. The volume of greyhounds that need to be rehoused is much larger than what is being spoken about. And there's one centre, I know where it is, it's in my own county. There needs to be about 15 to 20. And that needs to be rolled out. And it's when they are rolled out that people can see the progress has been made in relation to welfare for greyhounds, which really needs to happen. And I know many people who work with greyhounds who are actually very active in this and have put proposals to the IGB and put proposals to the previous minister that were never acted on. And they need to be acted on, because this is a central issue. People can't mistreat dogs. There has to be a proper system in place, proper welfare system that is funded. It's absolutely critical. And also, in relation to the funding that the IGB do get, the volumes of it that come down to the ordinary man and woman who work in the greyhound area, that doesn't transpire. And that needs to be dealt with as well. I have a whole range of issues relating to the IGB, in relation to how they do their accounts, historical issues relating to the Indecon report, the whole issue of liquidising assets. And I don't want to see, you'll know about this industry, I don't want to see a number of other racecourses getting liquidated to actually ensure current funding can go on. When you're liquidising assets in order to fund currently your activities, that's not good. In fact, it's awful. So this needs to be dealt with. I do want to say one thing in relation to the racing industry, horse racing industry as well, which is obviously a critically important industry across the country, employs so many people, particularly in rural Ireland, and also has tangibility out into so many other sectors and so many other people who are working in it. But I want to say this quite clearly, because issues have been raising their heads in this. We need a sectoral employment order in relation to people who are working in this industry. Too many people are not being well paid, in some cases not being treated well. They love horses, they love the horse racing industry. And we have a very good name abroad. But we also need to treat workers right. So, Minister, I would implore you to work with your colleagues in government to bring in a sectoral employment order in that sector alone to ensure that all people who work in the industry are protected, are paid proper wages and are treated properly. Thank you.
Since our motion last week to reverse the increase in funding for the commercial greyhound racing industry, I've heard very little legitimate defence of the sector from its proponents. I've seen no serious efforts to address the loss-making nature of the industry or animal welfare concerns, or even acknowledgement of them. What I have seen are attacks of a personal nature on those of us who do not want to see over 2 million of an increase in funding for a sector whose custom and practices have been so discredited. Here is some of what was said about me. A member of the Irish Greyhound Board, Wayne McCarthy, referred to me as an ignorant little girl. He is a board member of a state organisation.
Just a long practice in the Dáil.
He's a board member of a state organisation whose wages are paid out of the staggering 19.2 million the industry will receive in 2021, paid by the taxpayer, paid by you, paid by all of us. I wasn't deeply hurt or offended by Mr. I won't say his name from now on then. I wasn't offended or deeply hurt by his comments. My initial reaction was to just ignore it. I instinctively felt that it didn't deserve any energy or thought. Indeed, I didn't want to waste my speaking time addressing it today. But when a Fianna Fail TD apologised for liking these sentiments, I couldn't avoid the amount of calls I was getting from the media for a response. The unfortunate reality of this situation is I wasn't deeply hurt or offended because I'm used to these kind of gendered comments. I rightly don't take personal offence, but in reality, too many women are subject to too many comments which seek to demean and belittle, and this offends all women. In the past week, in relation to the Social Democrats' motion to reverse the increase in state funding to this industry, I have been referred to as airy-fairy, a dangerous, dangerous woman, and a fool. It wouldn't be appropriate in this chamber to recite some of the other language that has been used. Women everywhere are experiencing the same kind of everyday sexism in different ways every day. We're tired of it. And so, as the only female TD in all of Cork City and County, I feel the need to address the sexism that we are also used to. I feel the need to put it on the Dáil record that a board member of a state organisation in 2020 spoke about it, an elected woman, in that way. And I feel the need to say that there can be no excuse for this, because there is no excuse. I don't want to use my speaking time in this House on this issue to address this everyday sexism. Women all over Ireland, including me, wish they didn't need to address this at all. But there is no alternative when we can't ignore it either. When we do address this everyday sexism, we're often met with more of it. We hear things like angry feminist, you're too emotional, or you should calm down. When you really think about it, we should all be angry, emotional and uncalm about the reality that half of the population are still in so many ways disregarded, patronised and condescended. Instead, many of us are numb to it, and that is even worse. This House needs to send a clear message to everybody that there needs to be zero tolerance for sexism. The member of the Irish Greyhound Board also claimed my remarks were waffle. I would like to put on the Dáil record that none of my remarks were waffle, the opposite. They were all fact, based on research, much of which was done by the Irish Greyhound Board itself. He hasn't challenged any of those facts. He has only challenged my personality and pointed out my gender. So I'd like to take this opportunity to invite this member of the Irish Greyhound Board to take part in a debate about the facts that I have raised in relation to the greyhound racing industry. The viability of the industry, the animal welfare issues associated with the industry, the public disquiet about the state funding, and I'm sure a national broadcaster would be happy to facilitate it, and I'd be happy to arrange that. An important thing to note is that although the Social Democrats' motion was defeated last week, we have another opportunity to finally put an end to this state throwing a blind eye at an industry's flaws and more money at its failings. It says a lot that the industry and public representatives simply don't have a legitimate argument. I have yet to hear one from any of you. Last week, I highlighted many very worrying aspects about this industry: the frightening levels of animal cruelty, the extraordinary cost to the taxpayer, and the staggering loss-making nature of the industry. The enormous public support for an end to the state propping up this very problematic industry, shielding it from commercial realities, receiving extraordinary sums of money from the public purse while breeding 6,000 dogs annually to kill them. The vast majority of the general public cannot understand why government continues to blatantly ignore common sense on this issue. Not only does our government plan to continue funding it, which to my surprise was supported by all government parties, Sinn Féin and the Labour Party, it is also increasing funding by 2.4 million, bringing the total allocation in the 2021 budget to 19.2 million, and it doesn't have to be this way. It is scandalous, unacceptable and indefensible.
Thank you, Deputy Cairns. Moving on to the Solidarity People Before Profit, Deputy Kenny sharing with McCarthy.
Minister, anybody that watched RT Investigates programme on the treatment of greyhounds and the greyhound industry last year would have been pretty sickened the way greyhounds were treated. And I'm sure there is responsible greyhound owners that are in Ireland that would have been completely sickened by what they saw on that programme. So I have a number of questions, and I think a lot of people, including myself, wouldn't have known how greyhound industry would have been funded. And it's a staggering amount of money since 2000 that over 200 million euros has been granted to this industry. And obviously 19 million this year with additional funding of 2.4 million. There was an article, now I know Deputy McCarthy kind of stipulated on it, there was an article in the Business Post on Sunday in relation to the government seeking legal advice in relation to decoupling funding in relation to the horse industry and the greyhound industry. So will you be investigating that, seeking more legal advice and trying to decouple the industry itself? Do you have personal confidence in board members of the GRI, particularly in the relation to the comments that he made in relation to Deputy Cairns? Do you have confidence in relation to the greyhound industry as a whole, in the short term or the long term? Because what it seems, as even a layperson, is that this industry is not fit for purpose. It tolerates pretty dire animal welfare that is not, should not be tolerated, particularly when it's funding given to the taxpayer via the government. So my question is, Minister, do you have confidence in the GRI as it is now?
Deputy McCarthy.
Well, I don't know if the member of the Greyhound Board is going to take up Deputy Cairns' challenge for a public debate, but I know one thing. If the debate has already started, I think he's losing it, and losing it pretty heavily at this stage. Just in relation to, I'm going to focus on the greyhound side of the funding here. So the proposal is for €96 million to go to the Horse and Greyhound Fund. 1/5 of that money goes to the greyhound industry, which would be a little over €19 million. This is an industry which, you cannot separate it in its format to cruelty to animals. I mean, 6,000 dogs being culled every year because it's not profitable, because they're not able to race at the level that the owners want them, and therefore what? They're culled. All but 8 countries in the world, I understand, have banned it at this stage. We're one of the laggards, one of the 8 that hasn't done so. And the government is proposing what? To give it more money, to increase the funding by 2.4 million. That would be €280 million since the year 2000, given by the state, given by the taxpayer to the greyhound industry. And at the same time as the state funding is going up, the industry itself is going down. It's waning heavily in popularity. I think the figures I have from 2010 to 2017, the turnover of the industry went from 32.9 million to 22.7 million. So it decreased by about a third. But from 2010 to next year, the state funding goes from 11.9 million to 19.2 million, so it's increased by more than 50%. The industry would not be able to continue if it wasn't being propped up by the taxpayer and propped up by the state. And I think if you have an industry which cruelty to animals is inherent within, then it should no longer be propped up by the state. There are issues related to jobs in the industry. That is an important issue, and the state should intervene there to provide training, the development of skills and alternative employment for people who are currently employed in the industry, if the industry is to go by the way. But we shouldn't be propping it up, and I'll leave my remarks and comments at that.
Regional Group, Deputy Matt Shanahan.
Corla. Minister, the horse and greyhound industries are an enviable and invaluable component to the economic, cultural, social and traditional fabric of Irish life. They have served to deliver prestige to Ireland. They are recognised brand ambassadors in developing Irish tourism abroad. They have created economic ties and have allowed Irish people to forge international links that have served us through good times and through bad. Through generations, passionate, committed animal lovers and sports enthusiasts in horse and greyhound industries have developed in Ireland through years of selective trait theory, international centres of excellence which have become known and around throughout the world. State funding directed through Horse Racing Ireland and Greyhound Racing Ireland is designed to support these industry sectors and to provide for continued sector development. The benefits of this can be seen in the 2017 Deloitte report, demonstrating that total direct and stimulated expenditure within the horse breeding and racing industry is estimated at 1.84 billion in 2016. This revenue supports over 15,000 jobs involved in racing, breeding and related industries. Horse racing in particular generates significant returns to the rural economy. Many farmers are also brood mare owners. If you come to my county of Waterford, I can happily introduce you to the farrier, the vet, the fence builder, the tillage farmer, the tractor mechanic, the stable lads and ladies, the jockeys who depend hugely on this industry for their occupation and many for their sole income. The greyhound industry too provides considerable economic benefits along with direct and indirect employment. A 2016 survey reported over 5,000 full-time and part-time jobs in the sector, with over 7,300 active greyhound owners in Ireland. Greyhound ownership and racing, although most active in the rural heartlands of Ireland, has also urban-based breeders and supporters, and I'm sure most people in this House at some time in their lives have enjoyed a night at the dogs. Both industries have been concentrated on furthering activities to improve and maintain the highest levels of animal welfare and care. There are always some people for whom profit is the only objective, even to the detriment of animal welfare. But in greyhound racing, where this can be a more significant problem due to the lower cost of ownership, the sector is fighting back. Provisions in the new Greyhound Racing Act 2019 seek to improve standards in traceability, transportation, to provide financial support for injured animals, as well as promoting a new scheme to look at rehoming greyhounds after their racing career has finished. The sector has been tasked with providing demonstrable change with respect to animal welfare and has appointed a new Director of Greyhound Care and Welfare to oversee these industry improvements. New technologies also are creating new audiences for Irish horse racing and greyhound racing. Some parts of Asia have discovered Irish greyhound racing by satellite TV, following the success of Irish horse racing in developing a global following. This increased interest is delivering direct income to Ireland through online betting tax receipts to the Irish Exchequer. This is in turn supporting the prerogative of developing regional economic diversification of Ireland through beneficial income, enterprise and tax measures. The financial supports that are being announced to support these industries are entirely appropriate in my opinion, given the decimation of income and gate receipts due to the ravages of COVID-19. These industries provide long-term income into the state, and the government will in turn be a long-term beneficiary, recovering increased tax-related revenue for these sectors in the future. The cultural implications too regarding supporting these sectors must be kept front of mind. Ireland is a world leader in these industry sectors, and as well as world-class standards in terms of animal welfare and husbandry, we must also consider the welfare of the people who depend on these industries for their livelihoods as well as their amenity value. Too often in this country we speak about the cost of everything. We fail to recognise the value of anything at times. The global leading position these industries have developed for this country must be maintained and supported so that once COVID-19 has been consigned to the past, these industries may again flourish and contribute to the advancement of rural and regional Ireland. Thank you.
Moving on to the Rural Independent Group, and there are 4 speakers. 5 minutes. Deputy Matthew
Margaret, I too want to support this and compliment the Minister in putting forward this fund. Global leaders, that's what we are in horse racing, and we're so proud of it in Tipperary. And where Tipperary leads, Ireland follows. The Greyhound industry dinner, and Deputy Cairns has just left, but I take no truck in what somebody, the Greyhound Board, said to her. That's horrible. It's not needed in this time. But we need support, we need regulations, and we need to root out any semblance of cruelty to animals if it's there. But I would encourage Deputy Cairns, if she come in again with a protest, to bring a greyhound if she's talking about greyhounds, not a lurcher. I want to salute the men and women, and there are many women involved in the greyhound racing and greyhound industry in Tipperary, and families, and it's the vital lifeblood of their community, and enjoyment they give them to others, and the amount of funds that are raised at nights at the dogs, and race meetings and everything else. So we're going to cut off our nose to spite our face. And I said this last week, and we're going to be a utopian country here, with wasteland, with no industry in rural Ireland, and we'll be all, smoke marijuana or something. Is that what we're aiming for? I mean, it's a silly and childish and pedantic way to look at an industry that's so vital to our economy. We must support it. And support the men and women that are in it. By all means, have proper regulations and reform the Greyhound Board. It's badly needed a reform, Minister.
Thank you. Deputy Michael Collins.
I'm delighted to show my support here today and discuss this very important issue about funding to the Greyhounds. And while many are running scared after last week's debate, where the opening statement by the Social Democrats and their motion was very clear, where they did not want to see the increase in budget for the Greyhound by the government this year, but also phase out all of funding by 2025, all based on a TV programme in 2019. In that opening statement, the Social Democrats ordered us TDs who spoke in favour of our greyhounds to declare who lobbied us or what connections we had with the greyhound industry. I had none, but was greatly insulted at the perception that a TD who would show support for thousands of caring greyhound owners would only do so for some ulterior motive. For God's sake, Social Democrats, show some respect to your colleagues here in the Dáil. I really do not know what kind of politics you are used to, but it's not my type anyway. To the Social Democrats, Labour and Sinn Féin who voted against funding to the greyhounds last week, where a percentage of funds was going to animal care, I say to you to sit into your cars and come down to Kilcoe in West Cork to Collins's farm, no relation I may add, who have a large number of greyhounds for many years. I did yesterday. I visited the farm, and to be honest, the best way to sum up the way they treat their greyhounds and care for them is truly awesome. They and other greyhound owners are furious as to the way they have been tarred by the one brush by the Social Democrats. I ask you now to sit up and acknowledge the thousands of greyhound owners who care and love for their animals.
Thank you, Deputy Collins. Deputy Richard O'Donoghue.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. I would like to dispel some of the fiction that is banted regarding greyhound racing. The Greyhound Racing Act 2019 is the first major upgrade of the Greyhound Act since 1958, and it is welcomed. The general public that own greyhounds mind their dogs like children and would not tolerate any abuse of their dogs or their welfare. Yes, there is a minority of people in all societies and sports that abuse the system. Yes, I say a minority. This Act will bring about traceability backed up by enforcement. The Irish Greyhound Board have an excellent relationship with the ISPCA and want to continue that relationship. The betting tax was raised from 1% to 2%, which now yields 95 million in taxes. The greyhound industry delivers an economic impact of 302 million to the national economy. So I have 10 seconds left.
Sorry, you have. I beg your pardon.
The past 2 years we generated 6 million in 2018 and 19, and the Greyhound Board qualifies for 20% of the Greyhound Fund. Minister, this is a sport for females and males.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting you.
As Caller, I'm listening to Hind Teacher all the time, but anyway, I've only a small amount of time. I want to say to Minister McConalogue, thank you very much for standing your ground and giving the money to the greyhound industry, because they are in trouble. They, like a lot of other sports, they're suffering because of the loss of gate receipts and other fundraising events that they had. I'm sorry that there was a lot of lies told by the Social Democrats in relation to the funding and to the care that the doggy men give their dogs, because I didn't meet one person in all of Kerry last weekend that was against the giving of the money to the greyhound industry. Only praised it from high and thanking us very much for ensuring. I can't understand for the life of me why Labour and Sinn Féin are lining up here together, cross-questioning the money that has been given to this very worthwhile industry. These people are more than repaying the money with the jobs that they're providing, and the betting taxes and all the other things that they're leaving to the economy. And we must support them further and ensure that they're funded further in the coming years.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you very much, last Concord.
Now to conclude, back to the government. Minister, you're sharing 2 minutes, is it? Or?
3 maybe.
3?
Yeah, I would say. Cathaoirleach, thank you for the opportunity. And I note from the Agriculture Committee's meeting minutes last week that all bar one supported and approved the funding, having raised various queries and sought some assurances conducive to accountability measures and assurances from the Minister relating to horse and greyhound racing. The one objection, of course, was in relation to the greyhound element of the funding, which is the democratic right of the person involved. These industries, like many others, have been further supplemented this year owing to the pressures caused by virtue of COVID. Now, notwithstanding the figures of over 15,000 jobs in the horse racing and breeding industry and the 5,000 jobs associated with greyhound racing and breeding industry, this funding underpins what is, of course, and has been alluded to by many speakers, a world-class and world-leading industries, the envy of many competing countries. It underpins economic activity across the country, bringing, of course, great joy and happiness, whether as a business or a pastime, whether viewed by supporters, or whether it benefits, as others have alluded to, many charities and clubs by virtue of race nights and so forth. But the issues raised at committee and in last week's defeated motion around greyhound welfare cannot be ignored. I accept and acknowledge that. But they are not being ignored, with 10% of the 19.2 million, almost 2 million in funding alone, going towards matters pertaining to improvements around greyhound care funds, improved traceability and adoption programmes. Commitments that remain conditional on improvements. And nobody in opposition, in this House or anywhere else, has a monopoly on the right to raise issues associated with the welfare of animals. It was acknowledged by all parties during the course of negotiations in relation to the programme for government, and that conditionality associated with the awarding of funds has been mentioned and is the case in relation to this government and the Minister with responsibility associated with it. Of course, there are rogues in this industry. There are rogues in all industries. There are rogues in here too. And I've seen the reporting of it has to be very careful as well. I've seen myself as an owner subject to ridicule in relation to something that couldn't be substantiated but made good press and made good coverage, especially when it was associated with me and the role that I was given initially when this Dáil was brought into use. But I want to say in relation to the other issue that was raised at committee and indeed last week too, about the financial strain that is associated with the greyhound racing industry. It cannot or should not be ignored either. It is and will be difficult to sustain that industry in its present form into the future. And I would call on government to ensure, in order to protect the long-term future and viability, that the industry, the participants within it, whether it be IGB, the stakeholders and indeed the Department of Agriculture, engage in a process to investigate and analyse the means and methods by which that industry can be sustained, not necessarily in its present form in relation to 16 tracks, which many in the industry realise and appreciate is not sustainable. But we and the majority here in this Dáil are committed to the industry and are committed to ensuring that the government plays its part in ensuring that it has a future, and I want to ensure it has a long-term future too.
You have less than 2 minutes to conclude.
Thanks, Last Concorda. I'd like to thank everyone who contributed to the debate here this evening, from different sides of the debate. And certainly at the outset as well, I want to touch on the comments made by Deputy Cairns in relation to the commentary that she had to put up with, which was simply unacceptable. And I understand in relation to the Rasia Conaireann board member who made those comments that he has apologised and withdrawn those comments, and they were sexist and offensive. the Deputy should not have had to experience them, and I certainly will be writing to the Chair of the Board expressing my repugnance in relation to those comments, and ensuring and reminding all members of their responsibilities for high standards, and ensuring that there is no repeat of such instances in the future. I think there's been a healthy debate, Chairperson. I think I've outlined in my opening comments the fact that both industries, the horse racing and the greyhound industry, support significant employment. The thoroughbred industry is worth £1.9 billion to the economy, with some 29,000 direct and indirect jobs benefiting from it, and with the greyhound industry, some 12,500 people deriving economic benefit from that. This is the fourth time in the course of a week that I have debated this particular fund and issue across both houses, the Oireachtas and the Agriculture Committee. It has received thorough interrogation, and rightly so. And I know different members have varying views in relation to it. I can't come back on all of the comments due to the time today, but certainly they've got a very thorough airing in the Agriculture Committee. I know members have different views on different sides of the House. I would just point out, coming back on Deputy McCarthy's view, there is a well-known saying that to hunt with the hound, to run with the hare, and to hunt with the hound. And I think that certainly represents Sinn Féin's view on this matter, because if we look at Deputy Stanley's comments last year after you voted down last year's level of funding, he said, "Shame on Fianna Fail, Fine Gael and Labour who passed this funding. Sinn Féin will not support such an obscene level of funding." Yet this year you have no problem with the funding that you called obscene last year. You simply just don't want the increase. So certainly if the phrase running with the hare and hunting with the hound was ever apt, it's certainly apt in this particular instance.
Thank you. Thank you. The question at this point is that the motion be agreed to. Isi an ceis ná go naim títar an tariscin na teachtaí atá ar thaobh na ceiste sin abrigí tá. Na teachtaí atá na gcuine abrigí níl. Is dócha go bhfuil an ceist rite. The motion has been won. Okay, thank you very much. That concludes that section. Moving on, Minister, we'll just give a minute. Yep.